Incredible magazines about the fact that I want to have a 10th child so my wife will have something to remember me by.
When Karen Grassle landed the role of Caroline Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie, it felt like a dream come true. The series was becoming a television phenomenon, and working alongside superstar Michael Landon seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. In the beginning, everything appeared warm, supportive, and almost family-like. But as the show grew bigger, so did the tension behind the scenes. And according to Grassle, what happened between her and Landon would leave emotional scars that lasted long after the cameras stopped filming. Growing up in emotional chaos. On Halloween night in 1936, a baby named Eugene Maurice Orowitz entered the world in Forest Hills, New York. Years later, the world would know him by a completely different name, Michael Landon. But long before the fame, the hit television shows, and the millions of devoted fans, he was just a troubled kid trying to survive a deeply unstable home life. Raised by a Jewish father and a Roman Catholic mother, Landon grew up with a strong sense of faith and discipline. When the family moved to Collingswood, New Jersey, he threw himself into preparing for his bar mitzvah with remarkable determination. Every day, he climbed onto his bicycle and rode to a neighboring town so he could practice and perfect his Hebrew prayers. It was a demanding routine for a young boy, but it showed just how serious he was about honoring his heritage. Unfortunately, he quickly discovered that not everyone around him shared that same respect. Years later, audiences would see Michael Landon as the charming heartthrob who could light up a television screen with a smile. But during his teenage years, he often felt like an outsider. In high school, he struggled socially, and later admitted that many Christian families in town refused to let their daughters date a Jewish boy. While that rejection hurt, it was nothing compared to the turmoil waiting for him at home. One family vacation left a scar that never fully healed. What should have been a peaceful day at the beach suddenly turned terrifying when Landon's mother silently walked straight into the ocean, intending to take her own life. Without hesitation, the young Landon rushed into the water, fought against the waves, and dragged her back to shore. But the moment that truly haunted him came afterward. He expected panic, emotion, maybe even gratitude. Instead, his mother acted as though nothing had happened. The shock of the experience overwhelmed him so deeply that he became physically sick right there on the beach. Years later, he would still describe it as the worst experience of his life. The emotional damage from his parents' collapsing marriage and his mother's fragile mental state followed him everywhere. According to biographies written about him, the stress became so severe that he struggled with bedwetting until the age of 12. When Landon finally spoke publicly about those years, the details were heartbreaking. Desperate to stop the bedwetting, he tried bizarre home remedies, including eating pickled herring and saltine crackers in hopes that somehow they would absorb the liquid in his body. Medical knowledge about childhood anxiety and trauma was limited during the 1940s, and Landon later admitted that nobody really understood what he was going through. His mother's method of handling the situation only added to his humiliation. Every morning, she would hang his wet bed sheets outside his bedroom window for everyone to see. Landon would race home from school each afternoon before his classmates passed by, terrified they would spot what he called his yellow shame hanging in public view. To the outside world, though, he looked like the picture of success. By high school, Landon had transformed himself into an elite athlete. He excelled in track and field, particularly in the javelin throw. In 1954, he launched a throw measuring 58.93 meters, more than 190 feet, setting a school record and drawing serious attention. For a while, it looked like athletics might become his future. Under different circumstances, He may have even ended up competing on the Olympic stage. That talent earned him a scholarship to the University of Southern California. But just as his athletic career seemed ready to take off, disaster struck. A torn shoulder ligament destroyed his ability to compete, shattered his dreams of becoming a professional athlete, and ultimately forced him to leave college altogether. For many people, that kind of setback would have marked the end of the road. For Michael Landon, it became the beginning of something entirely different. With sports no longer an option, he headed to Los Angeles, hoping to somehow break into Hollywood, despite having no acting experience and no industry connections. Still, he understood one important truth about show business. Being close to opportunity mattered. So he came up with a clever plan. Landon took a job as an attendant directly across the street from Warner Brothers Studios, placing himself right in the middle of the action. It turned out to be one of the smartest decisions he ever made. Before long, a talent agent noticed him and suggested that Eugene Maurice Orowitz might not exactly fit on a movie marquee. The search for a new identity reportedly involved flipping through a phone book until they landed on a stronger, more marketable name, Michael Landon. Almost overnight, everything started changing. After adopting his new name, Landon began booking acting jobs surprisingly fast. One of his earliest major television appearances came in the series Telephone Time, where he played the lead role in an episode titled The Mystery of Caspar Hauser. But his true breakout arrived just a year later. In 1957, Landon starred in the horror film I Was a Teenage Werewolf, playing the tortured teenage monster at the center of the story. The movie became a sensation with young audiences, and suddenly, Michael Landon was no longer an unknown former athlete struggling to find work. He was a rising Hollywood star with rugged good looks and an army of fans falling for him almost overnight. What many of those fans did not realize was that Landon was already married. Before fame completely changed his life, the 20-year-old actor had fallen in love with a woman named Dodie Levy-Fraser. She already had a son from a previous marriage, and together they later adopted another child in 1960. While little is publicly known about the details of their relationship, it marked the beginning of Landon's complicated personal life, one that would eventually become just as dramatic as the roles he played on screen. And at that point, his rise to superstardom was only beginning. Fame that changed everything fast. A few years after breaking into Hollywood, Michael Landon finally landed the role that would change everything. It was the kind of opportunity actors spend entire careers chasing, the role that would permanently tie his name to television history. After several auditions and plenty of behind-the-scenes debate, NBC cast him as Little Joe Cartwright in Bonanza, the groundbreaking Western that would become one of the biggest television shows in America. But the truth is, Landon almost lost the role before he ever got it. Bonanza producer David Dortort initially had other actors in mind. He reportedly preferred both Robert Blake and Robert Fuller for the part, believing they were stronger choices than the relatively unknown young actor standing in front of him. In the end, though, it was Dortort's wife who changed everything. She strongly believed Landon had star power written all over him and convinced her husband to take a chance on the young performer despite his lack of major Hollywood credentials. Even after winning the role, there was still one awkward issue hanging over production: Landon's height. Compared to some of his towering co-stars, he looked noticeably smaller on screen. To compensate, Landon reportedly wore 4-inch lifts throughout the entire run of Bonanza, and he continued using them in later projects for years afterward. It became one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets. At the start of the series, Landon was far from the biggest name on set. Bonanza already featured established actors like Lorne Greene as Ben Cartwright, Pernell Roberts as Adam, and Dan Blocker as the lovable giant Hoss Cartwright. But something about the cast dynamic struck a deep emotional chord with Landon. For a man who grew up surrounded by chaos, instability, and emotional pain, the Bonanza set felt like the closest thing he had ever experienced to a real family. And in many ways, that bond became deeply personal. When the series premiered in 1959, Landon was the youngest member of the main cast by a considerable margin. The age difference was obvious both on and off camera. Ironically, while some of his older co-stars relied on toupees and hairpieces under the harsh studio lights, Landon had his own grooming secret to hide. Even in his 20s, his curly hair had already started turning gray prematurely, forcing him to spend hours dyeing it throughout the show's run. Still, those cosmetic details barely mattered compared to the emotional connection he formed with Lorne Greene. Behind the scenes, Landon reportedly viewed Greene as the father figure he never truly had growing up. Considering the dysfunction he endured during childhood, that relationship meant everything to him. But the Bonanza years also brought heartbreaking loss. When Dan Blocker unexpectedly died from a pulmonary embolism in 1972, the tragedy devastated Landon. Friends later said the grief stayed with him for the rest of his life. In emotional scenes throughout his later career, Landon reportedly used memories of Blocker to trigger real tears on camera. Not every relationship on set was so warm, however. Landon famously struggled to get along with Pernell Roberts, whose clashes with the cast became legendary behind the scenes. According to Landon, Roberts barely acknowledged him outside of filming and rarely spoke beyond his scripted dialogue. Tension between the two reportedly lingered for years. Despite all the friction, Bonanza became an unstoppable television phenomenon. By its 6th season, the series had climbed to the top of the Nielsen ratings and stayed there for 3 straight years. Families across America tuned in every week, and before long, one cast member clearly stood above the rest in popularity: Michael Landon. Fan mail flooded in by the thousands, and Landon quickly realized his growing fame gave him leverage. He negotiated greater creative control with NBC and soon began writing and directing episodes himself, expanding his influence far beyond acting. But while his professional life soared higher and higher, his personal life was quietly unraveling. Landon's marriage to Dodie Levy-Fraser had already begun falling apart during the height of Bonanza's success. Rumors about his growing reputation as a ladies' man circulated constantly around Hollywood. And in 1962, after 6 years of marriage, the couple officially divorced. The reason behind the split quickly became tabloid fuel. During production on Bonanza, Landon met an actress named Lynn Noe, who appeared in a small, uncredited role on the series. The two began a secret relationship that reportedly continued for years behind closed doors. Soon after finalizing his divorce, Landon married Noe and attempted to start fresh. But success had already started changing him. As Bonanza continued dominating television, stories about Landon's growing ego became harder to ignore. Even producer David Dortort later admitted that working with him during the later seasons became exhausting. Endless arguments over scripts, scenes, and creative decisions reportedly slowed production and created increasing bitterness behind the cameras. Then came another controversy that followed Landon for decades. After Pernell Roberts left the series, NBC searched for a charismatic new actor to fill the gap. Eventually, they cast Guy Williams, the popular star of Zorro, as a new Cartwright family member named Will. Most people involved with the show loved the decision. Landon did not. Williams disappeared after only 5 episodes, and rumors spread that Landon felt threatened by the actor's charisma and good looks. Stories circulated that he refused to share the spotlight with anyone he believed could outshine him on screen. Whether entirely true or exaggerated by Hollywood gossip, the accusations stuck. Eventually, though, even Bonanza's massive popularity began fading. By 1972, ratings had dropped sharply, and although a special centered around Little Joe's wedding became a memorable television event, the series was clearly nearing its end. Bonanza officially aired its final episode in January 1973. Fortunately for Landon, another massive opportunity was already waiting. Just 1 year later, he reinvented himself once again as Charles Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie. The family drama became another enormous hit for NBC and introduced Landon to a whole new generation of viewers. This time, he was not just starring in the series, he was shaping it. As executive producer, writer, and director, Landon became the driving force behind nearly every aspect of the show. On set, he pushed hard for emotional performances from the child actors. During difficult scenes, he would reportedly stand in front of them with tears in his own eyes and speak to them gently until they broke down naturally on camera. But while many admired his talent, others described him as controlling and intimidating. Stories spread about Landon ruling the Little House set with a tight grip. Actor Kevin Hagen, who played Dr. Baker, allegedly requested a raise at one point and was bluntly told he could either continue at his current salary or be replaced entirely. Meanwhile, other cast members remembered the atmosphere behind the scenes very differently from the wholesome image viewers saw on screen each week. Melissa Gilbert later revealed in her memoir that heavy drinking was common among several adult cast and crew members, including Landon himself. According to those who worked with him, he drank hard, worked hard, and smoked constantly. Reports claimed he went through as many as 4 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day, often crushing them out with his gloved hand. And when NBC finally canceled Little House on the Prairie, Landon responded in unforgettable fashion. Rather than quietly walking away, he reportedly ordered the destruction of the famous Walnut Grove set. Explosives ripped through the town the cast had spent years calling home. Some co-stars later admitted they found the decision painful and unnecessary. Landon, however, felt differently. He later described blowing up the set as cathartic, explaining that the actors had grown emotionally attached to the buildings, and the moment felt strangely emotional for everyone involved. At the same time, his personal life was once again collapsing behind the scenes. After nearly 20 years of marriage and 5 children together, Landon and Lynn No separated in the early 1980s. And just like his first marriage, infidelity played a major role. History seemed to repeat itself almost exactly. Years earlier, Landon had cheated on his first wife with Noe after meeting her on Bonanza. Now, while working on Little House on the Prairie, he began an affair with a much younger makeup artist named Cindy Clerico. According to reports at the time, Clerico was only 18 years old when they met. Cast members quickly noticed changes in Landon's behavior. Karen Grassle, who played Caroline Ingalls, later wrote that he suddenly became obsessed with discussing his renewed energy, libido, and strange anti-aging remedies. Before long, people on set connected the dots and realized he was involved with Clerico. The affair deeply fractured relationships behind the scenes. Many members of the cast had become close with Landon's family over the years, which made the situation painfully uncomfortable. Melissa Gilbert later admitted she felt torn between her loyalty to Landon and the sympathy she felt for his wife and children. Eventually, the situation exploded publicly. Reports claimed Lynn No confronted Landon over the affair after following him and Clerico, leading to an emotional confrontation that became tabloid gossip almost immediately. Although Landon briefly suggested the marriage might survive, reconciliation never happened. The divorce quickly turned ugly, and before it was even finalized, Clerico became pregnant. She and Landon married in 1983. The scandal damaged more than just his home life. Several endorsement deals disappeared, including a lucrative partnership with Kodak, and some of his closest professional relationships never fully recovered. Melissa Gilbert, who once viewed him almost like a second father, later admitted their bond was permanently changed. Landon defended himself publicly, insisting the collapse of his marriage involved far deeper issues than simply falling for a younger woman. But by that point, maintaining the image of television's wholesome family man had become almost impossible. Even some collaborators who admired his talent struggled with his personality. Director Hall Bartlett, who worked with Landon on the film Love Is Forever, later described him as difficult, egotistical, and obsessed with dominating the camera. Bartlett went so far as to call him one of the biggest liars he had ever encountered in the entertainment business. The diagnosis that changed everything. After dominating television for years with Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie, Michael Landon moved on to yet another major project, Highway to Heaven. By that point, he had already reinvented himself multiple times, first as the rebellious young cowboy, then as America's beloved frontier father, and now as a wise, compassionate angel guiding strangers through life's struggles. To viewers at home, it probably looked like Landon still had plenty of years ahead of him. But behind the scenes, time was quietly running out. In April of 1991, Landon traveled to Utah for a skiing vacation. At just 54 years old, he still carried himself with the confidence and energy people had come to expect from him. But during the trip, something suddenly felt very wrong. Out of nowhere, he developed an intense headache unlike anything he had experienced before. At first, it may have seemed like nothing serious. It was far more serious than anyone imagined. Only 3 days later, doctors delivered devastating news. Michael Landon had metastatic pancreatic cancer. The disease had already spread into the blood vessels surrounding his pancreas, making surgery nearly impossible. Years of heavy smoking and drinking had also taken a severe toll on his body, and physicians reportedly informed him that the cancer was terminal. For most people, that diagnosis would have been utterly crushing. Landon refused to surrender quietly. Shortly after learning the truth, he made a public appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Rumors about his health had already started spreading through tabloids and entertainment magazines, but this time, Landon addressed the situation himself. He confirmed that he was battling terminal cancer, yet he also made it clear he intended to fight for as long as he possibly could. He asked fans to keep him in their thoughts and prayers as he prepared for the battle ahead. And for a brief moment, it seemed like hope still remained. Less than 2 weeks after the Carson interview, Landon was rushed back to the hospital, where doctors performed emergency surgery to remove a dangerous blood clot. The operation succeeded, buying him a little more time and briefly lifting the spirits of those closest to him. That summer, he appeared on the cover of Life magazine in one of the most emotional interviews of his career. Frail, but still determined, Landon spoke openly about his illness, his family, and the painful reality that his future was slipping away far faster than anyone expected. Then, suddenly, the end came. On July 1st, 1991, Michael Landon died at his home in Malibu, California. He was only 54 years old. His third wife, Cindy Clerico, remained by his side during his final moments. For millions of fans, it felt like the loss of someone they had grown up with. But the legacy Landon left behind was far more complicated than the wholesome television image audiences remembered. For years, he had represented warmth, faith, and family values on screen. Whether he was riding across the Ponderosa as Little Joe Cartwright or guiding his children through hardship as Charles Ingalls, Landon seemed to embody the ideal American father figure. In interviews, he often spoke passionately about his belief in God, love, truth, and the importance of family. That image became deeply ingrained in popular culture. Yet behind the scenes, his real life was filled with contradictions. Long after his death, some of the most revealing insights came not from critics or tabloids, but from his own family. His son, Michael Landon Jr., later published a memoir titled Michael Landon, The Father I Knew, offering a far more complicated portrait of the man behind the fame. The book described Landon as deeply charismatic and loving at times, but also flawed, unfaithful, and emotionally complicated. According to those closest to him, his personal relationships often carried the same instability and heartbreak that had followed him since childhood. And maybe that was the real story of Michael Landon. He spent much of his career playing men who represented comfort, morality, and family unity. But off camera, he remained a man shaped by trauma, ambition, insecurity, and contradiction. He could be generous and difficult, loving and destructive, inspiring and deeply flawed, all at the same time. In the end, Michael Landon's life looked a lot like the television dramas that made him famous. Emotional, messy, unforgettable, and filled with moments of both extraordinary warmth and painful heartbreak. What Michael Landon did to Karen Grassle is unforgivable. When people think about classic family television, Little House on the Prairie almost always comes to mind. Inspired by the beloved books written by Laura Ingalls Wilder, the series captured the struggles and simple joys of frontier life through the eyes of the Ingalls family. It was wholesome, emotional, and deeply comforting for millions of viewers who tuned in week after week. The story officially began in 1974 with a 2-hour television movie that served as the pilot episode. Audiences connected with it immediately, and before long, the show had become one of television's biggest successes, running for 9 seasons and turning its cast into household names. At the center of it all was Michael Landon. Already famous after spending 14 years starring in Bonanza, Landon took on the role of Charles Pa Ingalls. But his work behind the scenes was just as important as what viewers saw on screen. He wrote episodes, directed many of them, and served as executive producer, shaping nearly every aspect of the series. Alongside him was Karen Grassle, who played Caroline Ma Ingalls with warmth and quiet strength. The rest of the Ingalls family was brought to life by Melissa Gilbert as Laura, Melissa Sue Anderson as Mary, and twins Lindsay Greenbush and Sydney Greenbush sharing the role of Little Carrie. For Karen Grassle, landing the role of Caroline Ingalls felt almost unbelievable. At the time, she was still largely unknown, stepping into a project led by one of television's biggest stars. Michael Landon believed deeply in adapting Laura Ingalls Wilder's frontier stories for television, and he was willing to stake his reputation on making it happen. But Grassle's audition was anything but glamorous. At Paramount Studios, she was reportedly given very simple instructions: wear a dress and no makeup. That might sound easy enough today, but in the 1970s, Hollywood style leaned heavily toward trendy fashion, dramatic eyeliner, and flashy looks. Grassle understood immediately that none of that fit the image of Caroline Ingalls, the hard-working pioneer mother audiences were supposed to believe in. So she committed fully to the role. She spent what felt like a small fortune at the time on a modest wool dress with a turtleneck and flared skirt. Even then, she quietly bent the rules just a little, adding the faintest touch of brown eyeshadow before walking into the audition. The gamble paid off almost instantly. Not long after she finished reading her scene, Michael Landon reportedly jumped up with excitement and shouted for wardrobe to get involved. Just like that, Karen Grassle had become Ma Ingalls. Filming the first season in the rural landscapes around Sonora, California created an unusually close atmosphere among the cast. Grassle quickly formed a strong connection with Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura, the spirited daughter affectionately nicknamed Half Pint on the show. But she made an effort with all of the children. She spent time building trust with Melissa Sue Anderson and the Greenbush twins because she wanted them to genuinely feel safe and cared for around her. Grassle understood that if the family dynamic was going to work on screen, the emotional bond had to feel real behind the scenes too. At first, her relationship with Michael Landon seemed positive. Grassle later described him as kind, encouraging, and supportive during those early days. Television was still fairly new territory for her, and Landon gave her room to settle into the role and grow comfortable in front of the camera. At the same time, she could already see how intense he was. Landon carried enormous pressure on his shoulders. He wasn't just acting, he was managing scripts, directing episodes, overseeing production, and protecting the success of the entire series. His energy could be exhausting, but Grassle also recognized how talented he was. For a while, everything appeared to be running smoothly. Then, money entered the picture. Before the second season, tensions exploded when Grassle asked for a raise. According to her later recollections, Landon refused and argued that her salary should remain closer to what the child actors earned. To Grassle, the comment felt deeply insulting. She had become one of the faces of a hit television series and believed she deserved equal respect as a co-star. The disagreement created a crack in their relationship that only widened over time. Grassle later claimed that Landon tried convincing her that audiences did not care about her character as much as she believed they did. Soon, she noticed Caroline Ingalls receiving fewer storylines, with scenes sometimes cut down or removed altogether. Off-camera, things allegedly became even more uncomfortable. Grassle described moments during dailies where Landon would mock her appearance or facial expressions to entertain crew members. She also claimed his behavior around male crew members sometimes turned crude and humiliating, especially on the bedroom set used for the Ingalls family scenes. According to Grassle, inappropriate jokes and vulgar comments became increasingly common, leaving her feeling embarrassed and emotionally frozen in the moment. Still, she rarely pushed back openly. Like many women working in Hollywood during the 1970s, Grassle had grown accustomed to an industry culture filled with dismissive attitudes and locker room behavior. Speaking out against powerful men simply was not something many actresses felt safe doing at the time. So instead, she focused on surviving the situation professionally. She kept working, stayed polite, and tried to avoid creating more conflict while continuing to play the role audiences loved. Eventually, Grassle did receive the raise she had fought for, but the damage between her and Landon lingered for years afterward. Thankfully, the story did not end entirely in bitterness. Before Michael Landon's death in 1991, the two were able to reconcile and leave their conflict behind. Looking back later in life, Karen Grassle expressed gratitude that they found peace with one another before it was too late.